Hello friends, this is Peaceful Anarchism on the Voluntary Virtues Network every Thursday afternoon, 1 to 1:30 p.m. I'm your host, Danilo Cuellar, and today we'll be discussing how the timeless luster of gold and silver can restrain governments and end war. So this is an elaboration of a previous blog post I did entitled, "Is Money the Root of All Evil?" referring to Mike Maloney's video by the same name. An oft repeated but erroneous assertion is money is the root of all evil. How can this be so? Money is simply an inanimate object. How can an inanimate object be blamed for anything? If a civilian man murders someone with a gun, does the gun go to jail? If he murders someone with a chainsaw, does the chainsaw go to jail? Guns, chainsaws, and anything that one person might use to harm another person can all be used for the purposes of good as well as evil. If a computer program malfunctions, do you blame the program or the human programmer? I hope the idiocy of this assertion is apparent. Before free and peaceful people chose money, barter was the trade method of choice. This carried with it inherent problems, which included lack of coincidence of wants, lack of division, lack of common measure of value, and lack of store of value. Money and currency were born out of necessity as communities grew. Money is a tool chosen by free and peaceful people to trade amongst each other. It was chosen because it satisfied certain criteria that facilitated trade. These criteria include portability, divisibility, fungibility, or interchangeability, durability, and a store of value. Now, there is a fundamental difference between money and currency. Currency is all those things minus being a store of value. It can be controlled by governments in the form of central banks and legal tender laws. However, this is not necessary. Some examples of currency not controlled by governments include tobacco, exotic bird feathers, colored beads, stamps, candy bars, nails, copper, lumber, axe heads, seashells, salt, sugar, spices, etc. All of these substances satisfied some criteria of money, but lacked one or two others, and so were eventually abandoned. Eventually, about 5,000 years ago, precious metals, more specifically gold and silver, began their use by free and peaceful people, although governments have over the millennia attempted to control, standardize, and issue its use. These efforts have always failed. Precious metals always retain their intrinsic value and therefore are a wonderful protection against deficit spending, pork barrel spending, warfare, imperialism, and grandiose public works that insane governments frequently try to fund through taxation and debt. The market can only be unnaturally stretched and distorted so far by governments before it snaps back. When this snapback occurs, beware, for it is during this phase that much of the illusory wealth disappears, as gold and silver do in accounting for all the excess fiat currency, government bonds, and debt that was created during the distortion. This is known as the boom-bust cycle. This economic mechanism has been in effect in an exaggerated way for as long as governments have sought to meddle and intervene in so-called monetary policy. As long as we allow government through central banks to control and manage our money, we will never be free. It is a rigged game on an uneven playing field. It is playing Monopoly with someone who can print unlimited amounts of currency. Far from money being the root of all evil, money is at the root of human trade and therefore plays an integral role in our economic health and vitality. Support the black market. Support the counter economy. Get your wealth out of fiat currency and the CFI banks, which would be systemically important financial institutions. The state can be defeated not by violent revolution, but by economic self-sufficiency and by withdrawing support of a decadent and predatory system. Simply remove nourishment from the parasite, and it will necessarily shrivel up and die without the application of any force whatsoever. And I end with a quote from The Hidden Secrets of Money, which is Mike Maloney's documentary series from episode 2. Due to Gresham's law, gold and silver started to disappear from circulation from 431 to 404 BC as people spent the government-enforced copper coins and hoarded the gold-silver coins. Suddenly, it took a whole bunch of copper coins to buy a gold-silver coin. This is the first time gold or silver ever had a price. Before that, everything was measured in a weight of gold and silver. So, this is one of my favorite topics to discuss. This is what I learned first when I first started learning about libertarianism, Austrian macroeconomics, precious metals. It's an amazing topic because they really, learning about monetary history, you understand that it forms the foundation of a thriving and prosperous society, right? Because the reflection of a free monetary system, unfettered, unencumbered, without restrictions, without laws, will ensure that the people are prosperous. The money is it's like the lifeblood of an economy. That's what we use to trade in, right? And once governments immediately start to control and they start to debase and debauch the currency, that's when you begin to have all of the problems that are typically associated with capitalism and with business, free enterprise and all that stuff. People get it kind of misunderstood, but the truth is that a lot of these distortions in the economy are completely unnatural and artificial, and would not really occur to the exaggerated extent that they do occur if government was not so, if it did not take such an interventionist approach, right? Did not meddle so much in so-called, quote, fiscal policy, right, or monetary policy. So let's discuss this. Gold and silver started being used in ancient Egypt about 5,000 years ago as trade. It was not necessarily considered money, but it was used in trade. And this is fascinating because people didn't use gold and silver because they were forced to. They used it because they chose to, right? They found that it was an ideal medium for exchange, right? Because as I stated, barter has many deficiencies associated with it. Barter is good, but when society begins to, when communities begin to, aggregate and people settle down in large groups of large communities, barter is not sufficient and frequently produces unbalance. So having a commonly regarded medium of exchange that everybody values, such as gold and silver, is very useful. Everybody wants gold and silver. Even today, you can say that our governments are trying to institute a world currency, right? One world currency. Well, that's what gold and silver was. It was one world currency. Even today, you go anywhere on the planet, basically, and you ask them, do you accept, do you value gold and silver, right? They don't really accept it as money because it hasn't been money since basically 1933 when FDR removed gold, and then 1964 when I believe it was Lyndon Johnson removed silver from the coinage in the United States. But yeah, anywhere in the world you go, gold and silver are recognized as having intrinsic value, right? Intrinsic value. Now what does this mean, intrinsic value, right? Because because before human beings populated the earth, right, there was gold and silver. However, it wasn't really being used for anything. Same thing goes for oil, right, and all natural resources that we use. They weren't really being used for anything, so you can say they had no value until human beings came along and discovered these natural resources and began to use them for their intrinsic value, right? You can say, we, peak oil, and this, oil is harmful to the earth and everything in the atmosphere. But the truth is, something like oil or anything, any natural resource that's being used up, it really has no value until humans come along to use it, right? So the same thing goes with gold and silver, right? It had no value in the Earth's crust until human beings discovered it and discovered its value in terms of, the difference between money and currency, right? So as I said before, currency would be something that's it's divisible, it's fungible, which means $1 in my pocket is the same as $1 in your pocket. Buy is the same, right? It's portable. You can take it anywhere. It's durable, right? It withstands time, okay? So those four things are the characteristics of money, currency. Currency is something that it does not necessarily have to be government mandated, such as paper bills. It could be those other units of exchange that people have commonly agreed on, like seashells and tobacco, salt, sugar, spices. That people agree to exchange, but they all have their problem. When it comes to these definitions of currency, and then you have money, which is the next level up. And that would be precious metals, because they are necessarily a store of value, right? They increase in value with time. Therefore, the incentive is for people to save them, right? Not to spend them. People, when we're in a society like we are today of, rampant deficit spending, pork barrel spending, warfare as a result, paid for by fiat currency creation and debt, when you're in that kind of environment, you can expect the currency to be rapidly depreciating, and that's what we've seen: rapid depreciation ever since 1971, which is a key year, because that's when President Nixon famously took off the gold link to the dollar, right? So at that time it was the Bretton Woods system, which linked the US dollar to gold at $35 per ounce, right? So once he took that off in 1971, every nation on the planet immediately became holders of fiat currency, right? Because it was all currencies were linked to the dollar, and the dollar was linked to gold. So immediately it all became fiat currency, and then you have the rampant inflation of the 70s, in double digits, and that's when you had the first bull market of the precious metals, gold and silver, the first peak, because they exist on a valuation channel, right? So the first peak was in 1980, in 1971 when they delinked gold from the dollar. So gold had a fixed value, which it was completely artificial, right? Because you can never really fix the value of these things. It's really determined on supply and demand, right? What the people want, right? It's what the people are willing to pay for. It's not determined by any government bureaucrats behind closed doors. So once they delinked this artificial $35 an ounce gold price, it just skyrocketed, okay? So it went from $35 an ounce in a matter of a few years to $800 an ounce, which is a massive, massive increase. And then after that, it decreased for various reasons, you could say, manipulation, government manipulation, federal central bank interest rate rigging, all that kind of stuff, kind of fun stuff. and so if you look back in history, you can see these cycles So gold and silver exist in what's called a valuation channel. Actually, you could say most commodities exist in a valuation channel, but gold and silver is they're special because they're considered money, right? And so they're historically considered money. So so you can see that when the U.S. government before 1913, right, which was when the Federal Reserve was created, it was a fixed $20 equaled 1 ounce of gold. $20 to 1 ounce of gold, and then you had so the Federal Reserve comes in 1913, signed by President Woodrow Wilson. Then immediately you have World War I the next year, right? Surprise, surprise. How do you pay for the war? You print a lot of money, right? Because you're not going to get the people to pay for the war through taxation, right? Because they feel acutely when you raise taxes to fund some idiotic, self-serving, murderous war overseas, and they'll feel that, and they're going to withdraw support. People don't want to be paying for the death of other people, other human beings. Most of the time, people just want to work and support their family, and make sure their kids have a good education, make sure they have food on the table. Not many people want to work to support a bloody war, right? So the only way that they can pay for war, and this has been true time and time again in pretty much every empire, the Roman Empire, right? The ancient Greeks, fighting in the Peloponnesian Wars. You have, all these vast imperialistic empires. Every time they would engage in war, they would have to debase their currency, and they would have to do that various ways. In ancient Rome, it was they would clip the coins, and they would debase it by mixing it with base metals like copper and bronze, and so they would basically. They would take in, let's say, 1,000 gold coins, and then they would spend 2,000 gold coins, which obviously they didn't have. But it's all, it's all basically reflected in debt, right? It's basically debt that the citizens are expected to pay back. So World War I, instigated or started this massive fiat currency creation, which led to the the Roaring '20s and the supposed boom, right? And so it's basically it's basically what money printing does is it leads to an artificial stimulus in the economy, as all this introduced liquidity gets poured in, and people make investments and people grow their businesses, and so people feel like they're a little bit wealthier. However, this is a pretty deceptive feeling, because it's basically when you're when you're doing let's say I don't know, drugs, you have morphine or any kind of heroin and cocaine, you have a high, right? But of course you can't maintain that high, and so eventually you have a big crash, right? So the Roaring '20s was basically the introduction or the preparation for the crash of '29, and it was basically inevitable that it would happen. Incidentally, also, just to mention this, in Germany, where World War I was fought, for the most part, the German country was so devastated by all of the fighting and all of the destruction of private property and infrastructure and roads, bridges, all that stuff. So their economy was just destroyed. And then, of course, since they were defeated, on top of that, through the Treaty of Versailles, they had to pay war reparations, which actually, as a side note, I believe it was about $30 billion that President Woodrow Wilson borrowed from the Federal Reserve to pay for the war, and today we are still paying that money back, right? Incidentally. Should mention that a little less than a century later. Actually, no, about a century now. Yeah, about a century now. We're still paying that money back. So it's kind of fascinating, when you get into the upside down, topsy-turvy world of debt and fiat currency creation. So in Germany, after the war was done, they were enslaved by all of this debt. That also they had to print money as well to pay for their war, for their war effort. But So they were, after they were defeated. The Treaty of Versailles was signed, and they had to pay war reparations. That's the agreement for most of the time, any country that is defeated in war must pay the war reparations to the victor countries. And so I think just a few years ago, I think like something like 2010, the United States pardoned Germany. They said they don't have to pay the war reparations for World War I. They were still paying back the United States for World War I, right? So they were burdened down by the Treaty of Versailles, and in order to, so they had to basically lift themselves out of this pit of despair of destroyed infrastructure and debt and the war reparations. And so there was really a time there where they were very hurting a lot, and this sort of very economically poor environment is what helps to breed the rise of dictators and tyrants, right? Because the people are clamoring for their political masters to lead them out of this pit of despair, right? This turmoil. So this was a perfect backdrop for the rise of Hitler and the Third Reich. And of course, when he came to power, he was hailed as a hero. His speeches were like highly praised, and he said, "I'm going to lift out Germany from this pit, and I'm going to make it the envy of the world. We're going to be the technological marvel of the world," things like that. Of course, he didn't say he was going to kill millions of people and gas them, right? Because he most likely wouldn't have been given the seat of power if he had, right? Which basically goes for every tyrant in history, right? None of them, when they're campaigning, ever say that they're going to kill millions of people, because people generally don't like that. So he, of course, gave them all the typical political rhetoric that politicians know that people want to hear in order for them to get elected, right? So he basically, and their situation, their strategy for trying to get themselves out of this pit of economic despair is the same. It was the same strategy that we're using today. Exactly the same. And what is that strategy? Print money. All right? Currency creation. They lit up the printing presses like you wouldn't believe. And although there have been several hyperinflations in history, the German Weimar Republic hyperinflation of 1924 was fascinating, and it became one of the famous examples of hyperinflation in history, because you had, and it was basically, it was really like, carrying wheelbarrows of money to buy a loaf of bread, right, or a dozen eggs. At the beginning of the hyperinflation, I think around 1919 or 1920, the convertibility of the German mark to gold was, I think, like 100 marks, German marks, equals 1 ounce of gold. 100, right? 5 years later, 1924, after all of this massive currency creation, money printing, they had destroyed the value of their currency so much that right before the collapse, it took, in order to buy 1 ounce of gold, you needed 100 trillion German marks. Okay? Now just imagine the amount of money printing they had to do to achieve that. It was simply amazing. And basically what that signifies is that process of money printing, what it actually does to a society is it siphons wealth from the productive class, right? I mean, you think that it would be a good thing, right? Printing money, we always need more money, right? Maybe we just print some, that'll solve the problem. But again, we have to go back to the idea that wealth is not created from the politicians nor from the central bankers, right? Wealth is only created from the productive middle class, from the industrious people, right? From the entrepreneurs, the innovators, right? The creators. So these are the people that create wealth, not printing a bunch of pieces of paper with pictures of dead people on it and calling that money and putting some ink on it. That does nothing, okay? So all it does basically is steal, through what's called the hidden tax of inflation, steal everyone's, or basically specifically the middle class, steals the middle class wealth, right? And so basically the effect of this printing of inflation and eventually consequently hyperinflation is that it destroys and completely wipes out the middle class completely, all right? And also enriches the elite, right? Those who are, the politicians and the cronies, people who are politically connected, as well as the central bankers that actually control the monetary supply and print the money, right? So the poor see no change. Basically, they're still poor, but the middle class, which is basically the health of a country, the middle class is completely wiped out, right? So this is called a wealth transfer. So it's wealth that's transferred from the industrious who produce the wealth to the sociopaths in power, the politicians and central bankers who have done absolutely nothing to deserve or to earn that wealth, right? So this is the supreme crime of currency creation, or also called the Mandrake mechanism, named after a magician in the 1940s. Mandrake the magician, he had the ability to make things appear and disappear at will, right? So, which is basically what printing money is basically printing money out of thin air, just like a magician, right? And where does that money get its value? It steals it from the existing currency in supply, right? And that's the slow whittling away of your money, of your currency. So yeah, and towards the end of the hyperinflation, the Weimar hyperinflation, you had people using the money for wallpaper. You had people burning it for its heat, because that was pretty much the only value that it had left. It had no monetary value whatsoever. And just to give you an idea of how important precious metals is in a situation like that, at the end of the Weimar hyperinflation in 1924, right before the collapse occurred, or the wealth transfer occurred, gold, I think it was about 25 ounces of gold was able to purchase one block of commercial real estate in Germany, in the Weimar Republic. One block of commercial real estate. Now think about that for a minute. Now think about how much does one block of real estate in Manhattan cost? How much would that cost? And if you calculate that, I did a rough calculation, about, let's say, we can assume maybe $20 million, right, for one block of commercial real estate in Manhattan. How much would that be for 25 ounces of gold? If you divide 25 into that, I think it was roughly around $800,000. $800,000 value of gold to purchase one block of commercial real estate. So you can imagine the value that precious metals must attain to do an accounting for all of that excess paper that was printed. It has to even out, right? The distortions that printing currency creates is just simply massive. And you just cannot ignore the economics when, at the end of all that, gold and silver being something that is physical, tangible, and unable to be printed at a whim by central bankers, when it does an accounting for all of that excess money and credit. So it's simply an amazing process. And once you begin to study monetary history, you begin to understand many patterns and cycles. And that's the thing that we have to realize, that these cycles exist. And if we can take advantage of these cycles, you can prosper. You can benefit amazingly. You really can. You have to be cognizant of them, and you have to recognize and respect them. Okay, because to think that you can achieve success and be ignorant in economics or monetary history is one of the saddest tragedies and follies that I have come to realize. How difficult it is to succeed in any kind of business when you're ignorant in the banking system, ignorant in economics, and ignorant in monetary history. It's just one of the necessities that we must learn that has not been taught to us in any respect in our government schools, and I think that's for good reason. Because if we were all knowledgeable and capable people, we would be in a different place today. All right, well, that's the time I have today. So thank you very much for listening. This is Peaceful Anarchism on the Voluntary Virtues Network. Wishing all of you have a great day. Take care. Bye.